Yeah, I mean, when I joined the police, I joined because I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to protect the vulnerable, whether that was a child being abused or whether it was a victim of a murder. You know, for me, that it was as simple as that. But I found that I didn't work in child protection. I worked on major crime, but I was asked to go on these jobs because I had a natural ability with vulnerable people. And what I saw and what led to me resigning from the police was that in these cases, Operation Augusta in Manchester, and then Operation Span in Rochdale, I saw what I consider gross criminal neglect in pushing these children away, that they didn't matter. I saw, you know, a young girl who was featured in the drama that I worked on, 3 girls, you know, young Ruby, abused from the age of 12, made pregnant when she was just 13. We had a fetus that had been seized unlawfully, but even that man was not charged with rape. He was out of prison within less than 3 years. Another child, Amber, she was criminalised as a tactical option because the CPS decided they were not going to prosecute her abusers and subsequently found that they needed her evidence to run the trial. That child had her life destroyed, and it's taken me 10 years to fight for apologies and an acknowledgement that GMP failed those children. And you'll know that in April, the new Chief Constable admitted borderline. I take, you know, I don't agree with that phrase, borderline incompetence in how they dealt with that case. But that is not an isolated case, and it is not a historical case. No. It is going on today. And the case you've just mentioned, Operation Marksman in Humberside, is a prime example of that, of the same failures 10 years later that I saw in 2005 and in 2011 and 12. It led to me resigning. It's taken over my life. In the foundation, we are now supporting survivors, and we are advocating for those like the girls in Huddersfield, in Humberside, who were being ignored and abandoned and judged and failed by Humberside police. They came to us and we took their case up. We went to Humberside police. It started off, Mark, with 1 girl who came to me on my social media. That became 3. Then it became 7. Humberside police would not talk to us. We went to Operation Hydrant. They didn't acknowledge our referral. There was a really good journalist, John Austin from the Sunday Express, who supported the girls. But we wouldn't let it drop. And we then worked with another channel, with Sky News. Right. They put together 3 documentaries about those girls. We saw the evidence. We saw the diaries, we saw the messages, all those things, and now there is an announcement that they're reopening. Those girls would not have had that without the foundation.
Well, I've only seen about 1,000th of, or probably less, of what you've seen, but I saw, when I talked to some of these girls in Rotherham, which is some years ago now, and they showed me things that were contemporaneous and persuasive. But whatever town it is, the police behaviour seems to be the same. Now, you said GMP, people who don't keep up with the names of the constabularies here, that's Greater Manchester Police, which is not just Manchester, but it's also, for example, Oldham, where a 12-year-old girl gets picked up by her rapists in the lobby of the police station after the desk sergeant has turned her away because he doesn't believe she's been raped, so he tells her to push off, and a couple of other rapists pick her up and rape her some more. There's obviously some kind of cultural thing in metropolitan, well, not even metropolitan. I mean, West Mercia is Herefordshire, Worcestershire and Shropshire, which all sounds pretty leafy to most people, and they do it too. What's up with these guys?
Well, you know what, Mark? You get good and bad people in every job. So the front counter officer who pushed Sam away in Oldham, he should have been disciplined. But Sam has spent years trying to get the truth. When I took her to read the report for the first time, she didn't know that the identity of her abusers was known to the police for many years. She had been to the police. They had been through the internal complaints procedure. The council had lied to Keith Vaz and the Home Affairs Select Committee. It took the independent review, and she was blocked out of that review. review, as was every other victim in Oldham. But I knew Sam, and I took her to that review. She was heard, and her story is the only one that actually is the voice of a victim in that report. And it's the silencing of these victims that we in the foundation are trying to address.
Well, that's obviously deliberate, isn't it?
Yes, it is deliberate.
They have they say, oh yes, don't worry about this, we're going to have an inquiry, we've got some baroness with time on her hands who's going to head the inquiry, and then the first people to get shut out of the inquiry are these poor girls.
You know, you've hit the nail on the head, because I was an accepted, a non-institutional core participant in Alexis Jay's ICSA strand of the National Abuse Inquiry, looking at organised networks. There was me, there was Harriet Wistrich from the Centre for Women's Justice, there was Parents Against Child Exploitation. We were all excluded from that, as were victims. So you've got a report there, a national report, that was, the terms of reference were wrong, the victims were blocked out of it, and you've got to question why. And in the foundation, we see this every day. I've got a case now where there's a girl, a very well-known girl actually. She's in the public arena. She has been horrendously abused. She has tried to report it to the police, to Greater Manchester Police. She has been blocked at every case. This involves actually a very senior police officer involved in her abuse. We have advocated for her. Greater Manchester Police would, just let me finish, would not investigate. We have taken it forward, and the IOPC are now investigating that case. But one of my senior team members himself is being intimidated. Police officers have turned up on his doorstep. There's been an anonymous referral that he is assaulting his children. It's the same principle that young Samantha had when she came on your show, that somebody turned up at her door, knocking on the door. So there is a determination to silence anybody who challenges the way that the authorities are behaving. And I want to see accountability. We don't have anybody. Nobody has yet been held to account for 20 or 30 years of failing these children. It is still going on, and to the best of my knowledge, the foundation is the only place that is independent, that is not funded by these organisations, that is advocating for the thousands of victims throughout the country who are being silenced, and they are powerless.
Why do you think then that because I've met enough of the well, not enough of them, but I've met girls from several of these towns now over the last 6 or 7 years or whatever it is, and I don't understand why the obvious position for any sentient creature is not to be on the side of the girls. Instead, these networks, they're networks and they're organised around things like the taxi firms or the hooker bars, so they're operating in plain sight. What the hell is, I take it, these policemen don't actually want to gang rape girls, but at the same time, they look at the girls and they look at the gang rape networks and they incline to the side of the gang rape networks. Why is that?
You see, I don't blame individual police officers. I blame those at the top. And I go to the government because, years ago, I know that the Home Office sent out a circular to all police forces not to investigate these crimes. That was an official...
is that Home Office?
The Home Office, yeah.
Do you know who sent that out?
I believe it was under the Labour government, which was... it was Keir Starmer wasn't the good...
so it was Blair or Brown?
It was Gordon Brown. Okay. That is my information. So when that kind of a message comes down from the government, chief constables now are actually... They're not independent. They are political pawns. They are doing the bidding of the government. And if from on high the message comes down that these girls don't matter, and if these cases are not prioritised, if they don't get resources, because they are extremely difficult cases to investigate and to prosecute, and you need resources. On Augusta that I worked on, it's public knowledge now that senior officers, the most senior officers, made a deliberate decision that they will close down that case because they wouldn't put resources in. And we had 100 paedophiles on a database. Greater Manchester Police have now been forced to reopen that case 15 years later. So if the message from on high comes down, these cases don't matter, because they won't give resources, they don't give time. Individual police officers need time. These gangs are so sophisticated, Mark, they have been allowed to develop over 20 or 30 years. They know how to avoid being caught, and the stark truth is that the authorities need to put resources in, they need to prioritise it, they need people like me who care about the victims. They need to gain the trust of the victims, and that takes time.
What about the position? We had a councillor from Oldham on the show a couple of weeks ago, and his position was that this is simply an electoral calculation by the councils that run these towns, that the Pakistani community is an important voting demographic for them, and regardless of who's a rapist and who's not a rapist, they don't want to offend the community as a whole.
I think in the past, I think that was absolutely part of the decision making, because when I was in Greater Manchester Police, we had what was called an IAG, an independent advisory group, and that was made up of members of the community, and they didn't want to rock that boat. But I think it goes far further than that now. I think this is about saving money, saving resources. I do think that there is an element of that tiptoeing around. But for me, I don't care where a child abuser comes from. I don't care if it's a priest in the Catholic Church. I don't care if it's a Pakistani kebab shop owner. I don't actually care if it's somebody, in the royal family. For me, the law says that you cannot have sex with a 12-year-old child or a 13-year-old child. And when you have a victim that wants the police to investigate and prosecute, that is what you do. And you follow the line of evidence. You follow the chain of evidence, like Operation Marksman. And if that breaks down, or the victim is not prepared to go to court, then you have to reassess. But I think we need a massive overhaul in policing. We need to be using organisations like the Foundation to do the victim care, because you don't have one conversation with a 12-year-old child and they spill the guts to you. It takes time, it takes trust, but with the right person and the desire to do something, you can.
I understand that, but all these people, all these girls who are now, because as you say, this goes back to the beginning of this century, and maybe further, but all these girls who are now women, they all tell me, whether they're from Rotherham, Telford, Oldham, all tell me the same thing, that all they feel from the police is the contempt. When officers dismiss them as packy shaggers and white slags, that's the constabulary's position on the victims of this thing. How are they going to solve crimes if they think these girls are basically just, quote, packy shaggers who are asking for it?
And that's what I'm saying. You need somebody who's got empathy, who understands that these are victims. They need somebody to fight their corner. And the first point of contact has to be somebody who understands that and who will be on their side. But you know what I would like to do? You're quite right. This is partly a cultural issue within the police, but also within the Pakistani Muslim community. And when you know that the authorities don't record the ethnicity of the offenders, you've got to ask why. Right. You've got to I know, there are good and bad people everywhere. And there are many, many good people who are Muslims, many good people who are Pakistani. But I want to see that community open up the discussion. Why is it happening? What is the answer? Why is there silence around this subject? There are many women within that community. Some of them do come to us, and women within that community are actually themselves silenced. They are very oppressed. They are frightened of speaking out as well. But we really need to open up the debate as a country and understand why. The police need to prosecute the paedophiles. The community needs to address the reasons, and we need to have an honest discussion around it. And children and victims need to be listened to. They need to be supported, and when the evidence is there, we follow it. There isn't a cover-up. There is openness, and we're trying to help the police.